This is the Independence Wealth Podcast, where retirement strategies are made simple. Now here's your host and certified financial planner, Eric Nelson.
Welcome to the Independence Wealth Podcast, where we help you retire income smart and tax wise. Today, we'll be talking about something nobody really wants to plan for, and that's a late career layoff. Something that I've run into a few times in the past few weeks. But what we really want to talk about is how we can turn this kind of what many of us might view as a crisis into a plan or part of our overall retirement plan. This episode is especially important for those in our late 50s, early 60s. Think about those of us who are like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from retirement. Some of this information is going to be vital for you. So some quick context. Layoffs after age 50 are often are very common, and they're often permanent. While most people do find new work, it's often with a little bit less pay and a little bit less stability. Especially, you work for the same company for 20 years, you worked really hard, you made it to the senior level, and unfortunately, when they start looking at where they can make cuts, oftentimes they're going to go to the highest paid, which unfortunately is those who are very close to retirement. So while it's not just a financial shock, sometimes it feels like your identity and sometimes your sense of purpose gets a hit too. The good news is there's some practical steps that you could take to help prepare you and help you stay on track, at least financially. So one thing that I have a conversation with all my clients about is to make sure that we have reserves. So emergency reserves, an emergency fund, whatever it is that you want to call it, of 6 to 12 months. So you want to know that you have 6 to 12 months of monthly expenses set aside and understand how long your cash and savings will last in the event that you're laid off. So here in New Jersey, unemployment lasts for roughly 6 months. If you're making, let's just say your lifestyle costs $10,000 a month to make it really easy, and you're getting $2,000 a month from unemployment, we want to make sure that we have $48,000 set aside as a minimum to make sure that we can bridge the gap for that 6 months. So we have 6 months of living expenses plus, unemployment. So it gives us a little bit of a runway to kind of find what we're going to do in our next chapter. Oftentimes, a lot of these layoffs come with some type of severance package. And this is something that we help all our clients with and kind of discuss it and understand it, make sure we're not signing too many of our rights away, but understanding the payout terms and health insurance continuation, which obviously at this stage of your life is extremely important, as well as some of your retirement plan options. So it's important that after we review your severance to understand how much longer your company will either pay for your health insurance. It's important then to understand your options when it comes to COBRA marketplace plans, or if your spouse is working, how you could work into getting on their plan. The one thing that we always talk about when things like this happen, or really any major life event, is to kind of like pause any like major life decisions. So I always tell people, like, don't rush to pay off large debts or pull from your retirement accounts right away, even though there's the temptation to eliminate, your debt, for example. I had a conversation recently with a client who has a relatively small balance left on their mortgage. And there's this temptation to take money from your retirement funds to pay off the mortgage to lower your monthly expenses now that you're not working. While it sounds like a great plan in theory, unfortunately, long term, it might not make sense. Pausing all your big moves to kind of like take a step back, take a breath, and understand where you are, where you're going to go, is really vital during this time period. This is also a really good time to start testing your retirement plans. Let's just make an assumption here, and let's say we're talking about a 60-year-old who's recently laid off, who was planning for retirement at age 65. So if assuming you were on track, we'll start to rerun your projections, assuming no income, and see what that looks like. Understanding the fact that under that assumption, retiring in 5 years and you're 60 years old, the big issue we're going to run into is 3.5 years where you're not eligible for COBRA coverage. So understanding how we could fill that gap with, an ACA plan or whatever type of insurance we could fill it with. And kind of understanding what your income options are. Does it make sense if you go back and consult? Do you want to work part-time? Do you want to look at kind of phasing into a retirement, taking a job with lesser income? So understanding how that all works in your specific plan is something that we go over with all of our clients. Understanding that, rollover might not be the right thing to do right away. So rolling over your current 401k plan to an IRA, if you're under 60 years old, might not be the right thing to do, because if you keep the funds in your 401k plan and you're over 55, that you could follow what's called the rule of 55, which sometimes allows you to take distributions without penalty if you're over 55 years old. So sometimes you'll find you're closer to financial independence than you really think by going back and revisiting, your financial plan. Perhaps it's been a while, and perhaps market conditions or savings rate have gotten better, and it's putting you in a better position to even consider this an early retirement. Another thing that an early layoff can open up the window for is some tax and investment moves. So while it's not ideal to lose your job, it opens up the window for things like Roth conversions and realizing some long-term capital gains while you're in this lower tax bracket. And in some situations, the healthcare could be offset by an ACA premium, premium tax credit. And so depending on where your income falls and what things look like and how your overall plan is structured, understanding how these different factors can be applied to your specific financial situation can actually make a layoff one of the most powerful planning tools that happen to you as you approach retirement. So the tough part, though, is kind of redefining your purpose and understanding that it is somewhat of an emotional reset, especially if you don't feel like you're quote unquote retired yet. It just, you have to redefine what you are and who you are. Not too different than when you're actually retiring. So exploring kind of what's next. Does it make sense to do some part-time consulting, some different types of projects, a passion project, something that you and another coworker who perhaps were laid off could kind of team up and do some consulting work for your company that let you go, or other companies who are in need of the work that you do. It's a good time to kind of reinforce your mindset. You worked for decades to kind of build this financial freedom. If you're in a position to kind of realize that you now have that financial independence, it's now your chance to use it. Make sure that you take full advantage of it. So nobody likes being forced into retirement, but it happens unfortunately more often than we would hope. But if you're properly preparing for it and you're properly preparing for retirement, many people can maneuver and make updates and changes and offsets and kind of readjusting your expectations. And a lot of times you could end up in a much better place than what you originally thought, than when it first happens. So to kind of recap, there's a couple key things that you want to do, especially for those of us who might be in our mid to late 50s as we approach retirement. And that's number one, you want to make sure you stabilize your short-term reserves. You want to make sure you have that 6 to 12 months set aside so that this doesn't become a major financial catastrophe. Having that money there to bridge the gap between the time you leave work until you're working again is really the difference between making long-term changes to your overall retirement plans or not. Taking the second step of kind of stress testing your retirement and seeing how this might impact you. In some certain circumstances, it might end up being a net positive to get you to retirement. It might be the little push you needed to start to enjoy things outside of work. On that same light, understanding that now that you're in a lower tax bracket because you're not working, that you can now utilize this kind of tax window wisely by doing Roth conversions, realizing some capital gains, or perhaps utilizing the lower income to optimize for receiving tax credits for health insurance. So if you're facing a layoff or you want to stress test your plan because you just happen to be 5 to 10 years from retirement, and you want to understand how this would impact you before it happens, feel free to reach out to us, visit independencewealth.com to learn more. And again, I want to thank you for listening to the Independence Wealth Podcast. And again, it's been my pleasure, and we'll talk next time.